Yeah, you all knew I was going to talk about this movie when it came out. And no, you're not losing your mind. I am in a new setting at the moment. Because my mom is away on vacation, so I'm currently here at her house watching my two dogs, Bear and Belle. See? Bear and Belle. They're pretty cool. And speaking of bears, I think it's officially time I finally talk about what I thought of Ted 2. And I was very cautiously optimistic to see this movie because in my opinion, Ted is one of the best comedies I think I've ever seen. I mean, it was hilarious, it was clever, it was so original, and I thought it was a great directorial debut for Seth MacFarlane. Then he made A Million Ways to Die in the West, which as Ted would describe it, it's just awful, it's bad, it's unwatchable. So now the question remains, can he rebound after that? So this movie opens up, and it's set about 2 years after the first Ted, and he and Tammy Lynn are now getting married. They have their big wedding, and everything seems like it's going to be so happy and awesome with them. Until it flashes another year later, and Ted and Tammy Lynn are portrayed as just fighting all the time. You know, those kind of couples that argue about nothing, they're always finding some kind of excuse for them to fight. It just looks bad. Bad enough that it actually seems like after 1 year, their marriage actually might be on the rocks. So now at work at the market, Ted thinks it would be a really smart idea if they decide to have a baby together. Because then bringing a child into their life will allow them to focus all their love on him or her, and in return maybe will help them work out their differences and allow them to love each other more again. Which I thought was really smart to see because so many couples out there think they can just solve their personal issues by bringing something into their life that they can mutually love together. Because what those couples fail to realize, however, is bringing in a new baby or a new pet or whatever it might be for them to love together isn't necessarily going to solve the personal problems that exist between each other. Those are still going to exist, you just have something you can mutually love. So I thought that was really smart for them to use in this movie. But now Ted and Mark Wahlberg need to find Ted a sperm donor. And they eventually decide that the perfect sperm donor for them would be Tom Brady. I mean, I can't really argue that. I mean, Tom Brady would probably be my first choice for a sperm donor too. So they break into his house and they attempt to jerk him off into a red Solo cup while admiring what appears to be his giant golden dick or whatever. Brady wakes up, he throws him out of his house, and he throws Ted to Wahlberg in just a perfect spiral. And these were some areas in the movie that I thought were really funny. Because it harkens back to what they do in Family Guy. You know, they spoof a lot of the famous people on the show with how a lot of the public generally sees them as. They do this with a few other celebrity cameos in the movie as well, and I thought that was really good. I thought that worked for the movie. Eventually, though, Mark Wahlberg decides he will just give Ted his own sample of sperm. Which Ted didn't think to ask at first, because we finally find out Mark Wahlberg has been going through a really tough time lately in this movie. I mean, he and Mila Kunis have gotten divorced, and that's just basically left him completely out of the game, you know, so depressed and so upset. To the point where he's rejecting these really attractive girls that are practically throwing themselves at him because, you know, he's Mark Wahlberg, and instead has spent his days watching increasingly disturbing amounts of internet porn. It gets to the point where Ted's like, you know what, dude, this is bad, this is messed up, you are asking out the next girl you meet, I don't care. So Mark Wahlberg gives Ted the sample, but unfortunately he and Tammy Lynn now realize that Tammy Lynn's ovaries are completely destroyed from what appears to be excessive drug use. And to make matters worse, the state of Massachusetts has officially deemed Ted as property instead of a person. This means that their marriage is now annulled, you know, they have lost all their financial support, and Ted is even fired from his job at the grocery store. But the worst part for me is when Ted gets called into the office by the manager and the manager fires him, Ted gives absolutely no smart-ass comment towards him like he did in the last movie. It's like, really? You're just going to completely neglect something that worked so well in the last movie? Well, alright then. So now Marky Mark and Ted officially agree to take the situation to court. And it's officially at this point the movie was starting to lose some points for me a little bit. Because now it's starting to look like the movie has no idea what it's trying to be. I mean, it goes from Ted trying to become a parent, now it goes from Ted trying to fight to be a person. The key to any good movie is to have a very clear and focused plot to it. And this movie was starting to show less and less in that because it's just now moving all over the place. They eventually find out their lawyer is Amanda Siegfried, who's this young pothead attorney who's never defended a case in her life. But hey, she's attractive and she smokes a ton of weed. So, you know, Ted and Mark Wahlberg, they're all for her. And for the most part, I did like her character. But one thing I didn't like was the fact that they have to just beat over your head how little she knows about pop culture. And it's like the scene in the trailer when you find out her name is Sam L. Jackson and she doesn't know who that is and, you know, they play on that. Yeah, that scene was pretty funny. But the movie feels it has to address in basically like every other scene that she doesn't know anything about, you know, big TV shows or movies or whatever it might be. And honestly, they do that with a lot of jokes in this movie. It gets to the point from it being funny to the point where you want to stop and say, okay, we get it. Stop acting like such a broken record. So they eventually have their day in court, and they appear to do a really good job, but unfortunately they lose the case, and Ted is officially legally deemed as property. However, they do have one final chance to overturn this verdict. They have to go to New York City, they have to meet with Morgan Freeman, who's basically the greatest civil rights attorney ever, and they have to convince him to help their case. So now it's a road trip movie, because this movie still has absolutely no idea what it's trying to be. But hey, Ted still has to get Mark Wahlberg and Amanda Seyfried to fall in love with each other, right? And what better way to do that than to have them all spend the night with their car broken down in a barn in front of this giant marijuana field. However, best part of that scene is when they finally see the field, they spoof it like the Brachiosaurus scene from Jurassic Park. I mean, they got the theme playing, they're using relatively the same lines from that scene. I thought that was really clever for the movie. Oh, that's just because you're completely obsessed with Jurassic Park. Well, shut up. So they finally reach New York City. Which the whole time they're there, they don't make a single joke bashing the Yankees, Jets, Knicks, none of them. I mean, that would have been such a golden opportunity for some really funny moments, I think, in the movie. So disappointing. So they finally meet with Morgan Freeman, and he says while he sympathizes with them, he feels there's nothing he can do to help them win the case. Because he feels Ted hasn't really shown like any contribution towards society as a person would. So now with no hope left, Ted angrily storms into Comic-Con in New York City where he is greeted by none other than Donnie. Yep, his crazy psycho fan who ripped him in half in the first movie. He's apparently been working for Hasbro as a janitor, and he's come up with a plan to kidnap Ted, bring him back to Hasbro for the company to study so they can figure out how to make millions of living teddy bears for their company to sell. However, Mark Wahlberg and Amanda Seyfried, they arrive to save him. Donnie cuts the cables to a giant Starship Enterprise model that's just gonna crush Ted. Mark Wahlberg, however, saves Ted by throwing himself in front of it, which now places him into a coma, and now Mark Wahlberg is fighting for his life. And now we see them in the hospital, which might have been the best scene in the movie. The doctor comes out and he tells them all that Mark Wahlberg has unfortunately passed away from his injuries. Everyone is in there with him, they're crying up a storm, Ted's tearfully saying goodbye to, his thunder buddy for life. And Mark Wahlberg just all of a sudden wakes up and goes, "God, yeah!" Yep, that's his payback for Ted coming back to life in the last movie, pretending to be retarded. That's how you get even with someone, and honestly, that was one of the moments in this movie where I honestly laughed my ass off. Now Morgan Freeman returns, and he officially decides to take their case. Because he sees in the fact that Mark Wahlberg was willing to sacrifice his life for Ted, it shows that Ted has in fact contributed a lot more to Mark Wahlberg's life than a simple piece of property would. He's contributed in the sense that a person would. I mean, he did what someone would do for like a family member or a really close friend of his. Morgan Freeman pleads this to the jury along with the fact that Ted is capable of empathy and expressing self-awareness and emotions. I really liked what he points out because it talks about how just because he may not be exactly what a human being might be, the fact that people view him and treat him and he can't affect people the way a human might, that just makes him more of a person than honestly a lot of people you might meet in this world. The jury agrees to overturn the verdict, and Ted is finally officially declared a person. He and Tammy Lynn remarry, they adopt a baby boy together, and Mark Wahlberg gives the baby boy his own little teddy bear. Potentially setting up for another sequel? Who knows? And that is where the movie ends. So in all, Ted 2 did have some funny moments, a couple where I did laugh pretty hard towards. However, a lot of their jokes did fall flat. They repeated a lot of the jokes over and over again, and the movie, for the most part, it didn't really know exactly what it was going for. I mean, the chemistry between the cast is good. I like the whole, Ted trying to become a person. I just didn't think the execution was as good as it should and could have been. I will say this movie's a lot better than A Million Ways to Die in the West. I know that's not really saying much. It's definitely not as good as the first Ted. I mean, I can't really say this movie tips the scale for Seth MacFarlane's movie career, because I don't think the movie was great, but I don't think it was horrible either. I honestly just thought it was an okay movie. However, I am beginning to think Seth MacFarlane might have just been a one-hit wonder when it comes to directing movies. He honestly may just have to stick with television. So that's all I gotta say. Guys, thank you so much for watching my video. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.